squares. So this is exercise 6.3, completing the square. Another method that we can use to solve quadratic equations is to use the method of completing the square. You will only use the method of completing the square if you're asked to use it. It's not something you would do by choice, okay? Now, before we use the method of completing the square, that method actually uses perfect squares to do it. So, you know, the way we do a perfect square is we've got x squared plus 6x. I'm not sure if we've done it before, but what you do, you halve the coefficient of the x, which is what?
3.
Yeah, you halve the 6, which is in front of the x. So halve the coefficient of the x. So I might just write that. So I'll write it in a minute. So you halve the 6 and you get 3 and you square it. So half of 6 is 3, so you go plus, what's 3 squared? Yeah, so if I've got x squared plus 6x plus 9, that's really the same as x plus 3 squared. And I think I've lost some of you. That's how you complete the square. Yeah. No. All right, girls, yeah. You only complete the square with a quadratic, with x squareds and x's. You have to have an x squared and an x term to complete a perfect square. Okay? Now, all right, I'll write some notes on that. Shh. Right. Shh. Just, girls, I'm nowhere near finished. Girls, excuse me, that is not the concept yet. That is just introducing it and part of it. So to complete a perfect square, you halve the coefficient of the x term. So to complete a perfect square, you halve the coefficient. You know what a coefficient is? It's the number in front of the x term. So in other words, you get b on 2. You know how it's ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0? So if you've got ax squared plus bx whatever plus, you know how it's, shh. I won't put the c term here because you don't have it yet. We're trying to complete the square. So you halve the coefficient of the x term. So what you do there is you do b and divide it by 2. So you do b on 2. And then you square it. Then we square that answer, b on 2. So we square the answer from part 1. Do you understand what I'm saying? We square the answer. So that's what you do. So first step, halve the coefficient of the x term. So you'll do b on 2 and then you square it. Okay? So for example, if I want you to complete the square on the following. Let's say x squared plus 10x plus, and I want you to put the last term. Girls, so how do I complete the square on that? Half of 10 is 5. So we're adding, so that's what I'm given. I will add 10 divided by 2 is 5, so we add 5 squared. Well, that happens to equal x plus 5 squared. I'm completing the perfect square. So if I I started with x squared plus 10x. So the question is to complete the square on x squared plus 10x. So I've got the x squared plus 10x. I halve the 10, which is 5, answer. If we want to expand this, we get x squared plus 2 times 5 times x, which is plus 10x, plus 5 squared, and that's that. So that is now a completed perfect square. You might get ones with negatives here. So I might ask you to complete the perfect square on that. It doesn't matter that that's a minus, because it'll be x minus something squared if I want to complete the square. So halve the b. It doesn't say halve the negative b. It says halve the b. Now, doesn't matter if the b has a minus in front of it or not. You just want to halve the b, so half of 6 is 3, and then square the answer. So you add 3 squared, which is 9. I could have just written 25 there, and I could have written 9 there, but I like to write it as plus 3 squared because it lets me know that this is x minus 3 squared. You know that this is a minus because you've got the minus 6x there. So we go x squared minus 2 times 3 times x plus 3 squared, which is 9. We'll do those later. All right, now that's just completing a perfect square. This is not the whole method. So girls, can you just get that down? I'll just pause the video. I don't know where that... Oh. Okay, girls, sometimes you need to complete the square, but the numbers aren't easy or they don't look easy to halve. So girls, x squared plus 3x plus something, and I'm asking you to complete the square. Is this going to be an x plus something squared or an x minus? Yeah. And looking at the next one, will that be an x plus or an x minus? X minus something squared. Girls, all we do is halve the number in front of the x. So how do we do? Yeah, and I just like to write it, it's best just to write it as 3 over 2. So it's best just to write it as 3 over 2 in brackets squared, which happens to be what? 9 over 4. But I'm going to leave it as 3 over 2 squared. So what do I just put here? Girls, notice you see why I'm writing it as 5 squared? Because I just write 5 there. I'm writing this as 3 squared and I just write 3 there. If I write 25 here, you're still going to have to square root the 25 and put 5. So that's why I like to write it as 3 squared. You just write the 3. So what do I write here following that pattern? 3 over 2. You halve the coefficient of the x term and square it. Just wait. You'll see. With this one, what do? 7 over 2 squared, which will be 7 over 2. You'll see in a minute. So girls, this is just an introduction on how to just complete the perfect square first. This is not the whole process. Okay, girls, this is just an introduction just to help you with the process of completing the square. I'm going to give you another few questions, which are intermediate steps, I suppose, in completing the square. You could also get questions like this where you're just asked to solve these quadratic equations. Now, girls, remember when you're asked to solve something, you're trying to find x, aren't you? What do you think's stopping you from finding the x here? The squared. So what's the opposite of squared? Square root. So to get rid of the squared, what you do is you square root both sides. But, girls, when you square root both sides, on the side with the number, you have to do plus or minus the square root of that. I'll explain why. So if you square root both sides, you'll get x plus 6. But you must do plus or minus, but you must take plus or minus the square root of the number on the other side. Because I'll tell you why in a minute. So x plus 6 equals plus or minus 11. The reason is, if I say to you, both sides, you must take plus or minus of the side that didn't have the squared on it. So plus or minus of the number or side without the squared. Without the squared sign at the beginning. So because this side, left-hand side's got the squared, when I do the square root, see I square root that and I square root that, you know, squared and square root cancel, you end up with x plus 6 is the plus or minus square root of 121. I need to put the plus or minus on the side without the squared. Okay, girls, now, how do I solve this? I want to find x. Ladies, I want to find the x, and I need to move that plus 6. Yeah, minus 6, but girls, I want to move the minus 6 in front of the plus or minus 11, okay? Because it's going to look weird, plus or minus 11 minus 6. You need to listen, girls, when I move this plus 6 over, put it in front of the plus or minus 11. It's just standard procedure. So that plus 6 goes over to the other side as minus 6. Then I write plus or minus 11. So girls, what are my two solutions? minus 6 plus 11, or minus 6 minus 11, which is minus 6 plus 11 is 5, minus 6 minus 11 is negative 17. We're going to practice this now for the rest of the lesson. Okay? All right, we're going to do exactly the same thing. So girls, if you see something in this format, you don't go expanding it, taking everything to the left-hand side and trying to factorize it. It's already basically done for you. You look at it and you say, I just need to get rid of that squared. So, no, this is not the whole process yet. Yes. What we will be doing is completing the square and then doing this. So after these bits, we're just practicing the separate processes first. So and the other thing is you can actually be asked those two questions separately anyway. So it's good to do them separately. So girls, I look at this question, solve the equation means to find x. I just really need to get rid of that squared. So what's the opposite of squared? Square root. What do I do on the other side? But girls, I go plus or minus square root 8. Girls, this is one that can be simplified with surds. Girls, I square root. So what I'm really doing is square rooting both sides. So square root of 8 is really square root of 4 times 2. So x minus 1 is plus or minus the square root of 4 times 2. How do I write that? Because square root of 4 is 2 and the other root 2 stays there. Because square root of 4 becomes the whole number out the front and root 2 stays there. Girls, you'll see now why I want to move that minus 1 where to the front or the back of the other side. And you'll see why I move it to the front. It's minus 1 on this side. What's it become on the other side? And can you see that looks like what we were doing last lesson? 1 plus or minus square root of... When we were doing the quadratic formula, our answers were like 3 plus or minus square root of whatever. That's why we moved that minus 1 to the front. So therefore, girls, what are our two answers? 1 plus 2 root 2, 1 minus 2 root 2. Now, so just be careful here, girls. If it's a plus 6 here, when you take it over to the other side, it's a minus 6. It goes in front. Over here, if it's a minus 1 here, you bring it over, it becomes a plus 1. It goes in front of the plus or minus. Now, girls, we're going to now do question 5 from your textbook. I've got 17 minutes. There's about 4 or 5 steps to solving this quadratic equation. Actually, it could be 6. The first step, step 1, is to take the constant to the other side. So take the constant term. Do you know what the constant is, girls? It's the one without the x. To the right-hand side first. So step 1 is to take the constant term to the right-hand side. So we've got x squared plus 6x equals 5. The reason we do that, that's step 1. The reason we do that is so that we can complete the square. We can complete the square on the x squared plus 6x. Now, you're not allowed to just go and add a number to one side. It unbalances the equation. So we've got x squared plus 6x is 5. But what you need to do now is that was step 1. Step 2 is to complete the square on the left-hand side, but you add that b over 2 squared to both sides. So step 2 is to add b over 2 squared to both sides. Why do you think, I know I'm off screen. Yep, one sec. Wait. Girls, when we complete the square, if you've got this, x squared plus 6x minus 5 equals 0, we take this minus 5 just over to the other side so that we can just focus on this x squared plus 6x on the left-hand side, because that's what we complete the square on. So to complete the square on this, you know how we were practicing it before, we halve the coefficient of the x, which is 3. Now, I'm not allowed to just go, if x squared plus 6x equals 5, then I can't say x squared plus 6x plus 3 squared is also equal to 5. I've got balanced scales there. If I add 3 squared to one side, I have to add 3 squared to the other side of the balance. If I had a pair of balanced scales here, If I add 9 to one side, I've got to add 9 to the other. So that's why we write it like this. We complete the square on the left-hand side to give me plus 3 squared. So on this side, just add plus 3 squared. Okay, now the other question was different. The very first one I did, because I just said complete the perfect square. I didn't say solve the equation. Okay, I was just completing a perfect square there. So you write it in this format with just the x squared and the x on the left. You put that number away on the right. You then complete the square on the left by doing b on 2 squared, but you have to add it to the right to make it balance. Now girls, how do I write that nicely? X squared plus 6x plus 3 squared can be written as x plus 3 squared. See, that can be written as this. Because let's have a look. Isn't that x squared plus 2 times 3 times x, which is plus 6x plus 3 squared? So we write it like that so we can go to this step. Now, what's on my right-hand side? 5 plus 9 is 14. Now, this is what we were doing in the last question. Now I solve it. How do I get rid of that? How do I get rid of the squared? Square root both sides, but put plus or minus on the right-hand side. All right, so step 3 is to square root both sides. And remember to put the plus or minus square root of the right-hand side. And then what do you just do? And then step 4 is to take that plus 3 over to the other side. Oh, just solve. So what do we do now? X is, what do we got? No, I need to take the plus 3 away. You're trying to find out what x is. Minus 3 plus or minus the square root of 14, which is, girls, that's actually the answer. You don't have to write it. No, square root of 14 can't be simplified unless a square number goes into it. Does 4 go into it? Does 9 go into it? 16 is too big. So you leave it. So your two answers are x is negative 3 plus root 14 and negative 3 minus root 14. They're your two answers. You actually can just leave it like that. That is a proper answer. Negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 14 is telling you that. Right hand side. What does what? Plus or minus. I don't know. It's not that bad. Some people don't like it. All right, I'm going to do another question here. X squared plus 3x minus 2. So that's question J. So solve this by completing the square. Can I, so girls, that's actually not a long one. Some of them get longer. What do? What's the first step? Take the constant to, girls, this one's a little bit trickier because, ladies, they're not all as simple as the first one. Because you can't get a nice whole number when you halve the 3. X squared plus 3x minus 2 equals 0. Take the constant to the right-hand side. Then what do we do next? Halve the b. Yeah, so just keep it as 3 over 2. We don't need any fancy 1.5s. And add it to both sides. Now this one's going to be a little bit trickier, girls. So girls, it doesn't matter that 3 can't be halved evenly and nicely. You just write it as 3 over 2 squared. So you halve the b, which is 3. So 3 over 2 is halving it, and square it, add it to both sides. How do I write this perfect square here? And why do I keep it as 3 on 2? Because it helps you write the perfect square. It's going to be x plus 3 on 2, all squared, equals, this is 2 plus, what's that? What's 3 squared? 9. You know what? I'm going to work that all out over here, actually. 2 plus 9 on 4, which is what? What's 9 on 4? You can do it on your calc if you want. That's 2 1/4. That's 4 1/4. Because 9 on 4 is 2 1/4. Now that's 17 on 4. Because 4 times 4 is 16 plus 1 is 17. So you write 17 on 4 and get that all done now. So all you do on your calculator, 2 plus 9 on 4, you want it as an improper fraction, it'll give you 17 over 4. Now girls, what's my next step? What would you like to get rid of if you're trying to work out x? the squared has to go. So we square root. So x plus 3 on 2 equals, now what do I put on the other side? Plus or minus the square root of 17 on 4. Make sure it's all under the square root sign. So it's x plus 3 on 2 is plus or minus. Now can you square root 17? No, you can only square root 16. So you keep the square root of 17. Can you square root the 4? So girls, when it's the square root of 17 over 4, you've got to square root the 17, which we can't do. And you square root the 4 we can do, and that's 2. Geez, that's good, because it's still there. Square root of 4 is 2. It's still there. Which other one? Because 2 plus 3 on 2 squared on your calculator is 17 over 4. All right, no. You have to square the 3 over 2 first. That's 9 on 4. I've done it over here. 9 on 4 is 2 1/4 plus 2 is 4 1/4, which is... Square root of 17 is 17. Square root of 4 is 2. Now, what do I move? The plus 3 on 2 to the other side, does it go to the front or the back? What does it become, plus or minus? Minus 3 on 2, plus or minus square root of 17 on 2. Girls, if you've got two fractions and the denominator's the same, ladies, you keep one denominator. If the denominators are the same, can't the fraction be written over the same denominator? And it becomes negative 3 plus or minus square root of 17. I'll write that bigger. So this is negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 17 over 2. Because the denominators are the same, don't write it as two separate things. So therefore your two answers are negative 3 plus root 17 over 2 and negative 3 minus root 17 over 2. We need to do more examples, girls. I'm going to do P, I'm going to do M. I'm not going to do those harder ones today. I think you've got enough to deal with, all right? So I'm not going to do further apps today. Okay, can I get rid of that? All right. We're going to do question, which one did I just do? J. Let's do M. No, let's do P, because a lot of people get a bit confused with that one. 5P. Shh. Solve this by completing the square. Now, girls, of course, if you were given the choice, you'd use the quadratic formula to solve it. Ladies, if you were given the choice there, because I know that can't be factorized, there's no factors of negative 4 that add up to negative 1. No way. All right? 2 and 2. 2 minus 2, 0. Or 4 and 1. That would give you 3 or 5. 2 and 2 could give you a 4. Like when you choose the factors of 4, just add them and subtract them and just see anything you can do with them. There's no way you'll get 1. You can't factorize that. You could use quadratic formula or you could use complete the square. So we're completing the square. What's my first step? Move the constant and it becomes plus 4. Now I chose this one because you have to halve the number in front of the x. And the number in front of the x is a 1. Good. X squared minus x plus a half squared to each side. Does that make sense, girls? The b is a 1. Half of 1 is 1 over 2. So you add a half squared to both sides. Don't forget to square whatever you're doing. So what have we got here? How do I write that as a perfect square? X minus a half squared. Because that would be x squared minus 2 times a half times x is minus 1x. And a half squared is a half squared. Girls, the idea of writing it out like that is so that you can go straight to the next row. All right, what's 4 plus a half squared? What is it? 4 plus what? What's a half squared? What's a half times a half? A quarter. What's 4 plus a quarter? which is, as an improper fraction, nearly 17 over 4 again. What's my next step? Next step, square root. How do you know? Because you look at it and you say, I'm trying to solve x and that squared is in the way. I need to get rid of it. All right? Plus or minus the square root of 17 over 4. Please square root both the 17 and the 4. You're square rooting the other side. So it's x minus a half equals plus or minus square root of 17 over. So it's x equals, where does the minus half, what happens to it? Becomes plus a half plus or minus the square root of 17 on 2. Are the denominators the same? So it becomes one denominator, 1 plus or minus square root of 17 on 2. You can leave it like that, but it does mean you've got two answers, 1 plus square root of 17 over 2 or 1 minus square root of 17 over 2. I'm going to do question. Yeah. This one? No, because what we're doing is if you had x squared, let's say minus 4x plus 2 squared, it's what we did. Were you here at the beginning of the lesson? Wait a sec, girls. 1 minute. Okay, girls. For homework, I'm going to set homework. Just 1 sec. Shh. Can you please do, girls, shh. Exercise 6.3, question 1B, 1B and F, 2B and F, 3C, 4I, and question 5, last column, all of it. Thank you.